Welcome to the Disability and Opportunities and Advocacy for how we can help making things a little bit more user-friendly out there in this world. Cynthia BrianKate and Chanel, let's go ahead and get you started, Cynthia.
Okay, you want to go first, Chanel? Should I?
I'd rather you go first, honestly.
Okay. So first of all, we are here as part of the forming Green Party United States Disability Caucus to further represent and advocate and give a voice to disabled Greens in the party at national level as well as at local and state levels. Dawnmarie, do you have what the link is for anybody who wishes to join the caucus? It's open to all disabled Greens.
I'm sure we can get that up there later. I don't have it handy right now.
I've had a lifetime of just being, okay, you want me to talk? I'll talk. Do I have the info with me? Maybe. So let's see. I guess we can address, among other things, just advocacy, activism. The two are not exactly 100% the same thing always. Advocacy includes either standing up for yourself if it's you and people you care about who are affected. It can also involve advocating for people who it's not your exact demographic, but you want people to be treated better. Activism is, I think, a bit more directing. Everything from waving protest signs, the letters to the editors, calling out people when they need to be better on things. Anything you folks got on this?
Advocacy is actually something very interesting because, like, currently now there's a major intersection among reproductive justice, criminal justice, housing justice as it relates to both disabled and as it relates to the disabled community. It relates to the elders community too, but they just covered that in the last panel, so I don't even need to speak on that because it's not for me, but it's actually quite frustrating when you think of all the different ways disability can negatively affect your life because the access that you're supposed to be afforded to by the ADA is not given. I mean, I'm only turning 32 this year. I'm only about as old as the Americans with Disabilities Act is. It was passed in July of 1990, and I was born in November of 1990. So I'm lucky to have been born after people threw themselves on the steps of Congress to get rights for disabled people. Because I honestly don't know if I would have survived school, just even K through 12, without the accommodations that I was afforded to because of the different, both the ADA and the IEP legislation that happened. If it wasn't for those two things, I probably wouldn't have survived school and managed to get the education that I have. It's not much, but it's something.
I was, I think, a ninth grader when the ADA was passed. And a dear friend of mine and Dawnmarie's actually was involved in helping with some of the drafting and proofreading of it.
That is amazing. As useful as the ADA has been, it's not actually enforced in a way that makes sense, and the ADA didn't cover everything. So it's a blessing, but it's not a complete piece of legislation. That's, why we're not done. That's why we need things like the Social Security Restoration Act of 2021 and other bills such as that, and why we also need to be like genuinely afraid of things in California like the CARES Act, which essentially will force people into conservatorships and unhouse people into jail or conservatorships or mental health facilities, which is a
Yikes.
whole other conversation into itself. There's lots of legislation happening like that where people want to criminalize mental illness, which is a type of disability that most people don't talk about. And there's
Invisible one.
yeah, it's an invisible one. And it's frustrating because I mean, the fact that I, as a disabled person who happens to have bipolar disorder, could, if someone doesn't like me enough, someone could come in and take access to my bank account and put me in a situation where I could no longer control my own money. It's scary. It's what happens
Yeah.
happening to Wendy Williams right now.
Oh, hadn't heard.
It's pretty dang wild. I mean, I want to personally abolish all conservatorships if we can do that, because they take away so much of people's ability to advocate for themselves and control their own lives. And I mean, the Green Party is about nothing if not bodily autonomy. I mean,
Oh yeah,
we've
that
been
definitely takes
advocating for
away
that
bodily
for,
autonomy. What they did to Britney Spears. I mean, they tried to sterilize her because, ooh, the conservators say this. So, yeah, the simple idea of taking away someone's ability to live any aspect of their life just because of their mental health status. Yeah, that's as far as I uh, understand from our national platform, our values, our pillars. That kind of stuff's a no-no under the Green Party.
I think it's one of those things where people don't know how strong the Green Party how strong the Green Party has been as it relates to disability rights because of our position on bodily autonomy. People don't know that we've had in our platform for years a guaranteed right to a livable income and specifically the way that we talk about guaranteed income and Social Security, we've already said it needed to be at least doubled. It has to be livable. This
Yeah,
perpetual poverty that disabled people are stuck in because of the way the Social Security is administered is not okay. The Green Party has been saying that for longer than I've been alive, but people just don't know. And we've got to try as a party to do better about letting people
yeah.
know about that, because I'm friends with a lot of disability rights advocacy people who actually work in policy now because I attempted to run for office and I met a lot of interesting people during that time. But they didn't even know when we had, they didn't even know that we had these sort of things in our platform. So we got to figure out a way to bring that to the forefront, because there are hundreds of thousands of disabled people who would probably be Greens if they knew how hard the Green Party seeks to fight for their rights in all aspects of their life.
I got an idea on that. I think we as a party should put this out uh, all the time in media, social media, anywhere that we have any reach. Because I'm a vice chair of the Suffolk County of Long Island Party, GPOS, Green Party of Suffolk. And I consider not just me doing it, but we have other people in that chapter. In fact, half of our entire executive board are disabled Greens with various disabilities. And I feel we've become a model for other Green Party chapters and whatever else we call our departments and things. Uh, we have been out around the entire island and parts of the state, putting out things in person when we can, social media, and everything from YouTube to Facebook to whatever other social media people more tech savvy than me in GPOS do. And we've made it clear we're working on a lot of things, but disability rights has been one of the foremost ones. We have a declared mission, as we call it, on transportation rights for all people who cannot drive, whether that's due to disability, due to age status and/or disability, whether it's due to economics, living in areas with bad transit. Because the thing is, while the ADA did do a lot of good stuff, even our friend who helped with it is one of the foremost people I know saying, why wasn't it made better? Why hasn't it caught up with the last 30 years? ADA has not been always interpreted to include transportation as a basic right. That is a basic life or death right that all people need, but particularly disabled people. I'm legally blind, which is why my eye contact is pretty much non-existent or all over the map when I'm talking to y'all. Oddly enough, that's considered an invisible disability half the time. I don't get it. I got dark glasses and white cane when I go any place outside my house, yet I still get people saying, but you're visually disabled? Yeah. Part of it is the bumper sticker attitudes of the real disability. Because yes, there are many things I cannot physically do because my eyes don't work the way that a fully sighted person's do. But there should be accommodations in all things. That includes the internet. All tech platforms should be accessible to the disabled. That includes even things like the Eventee app that groups like us have used to put out when workshops and things are. That includes Zoom sometimes. Right before this panel, I was having a headache just getting Zoom to recognize you have a microphone on your iPhone. Yeah, I kind of do. Websites need to be screen reader friendly. Alternate text. Chanel is a freaking master at either doing it or having other people do it. In the Young Eco-Socialist Caucus, I have heard rather than seen nothing but amazing. Every time that y'all put out something electronic, I just have to put my digital cursor thing over it, and if it's a picture, it'll say, these people over here are doing this thing and they're moving like this, and the background is such and such. That's a simple thing that anybody that puts a website together can do. I'm building a book blog where every picture on it has alternate text because I can't see my own pictures. So there's simple stuff like this. There's also advocating for legislation to expand the ADA, to make Social Security, as Chanel said, a livable wage. That includes that when some jerkwad politician tries putting out something to mess with some of the positive beneficial legislation we got, that we oppose it. That we oppose it as Greens, we oppose it as our chapters, like the way that Green Party of Suffolk has come out either in favor of every addition to disability accommodations or has come out loudly against any attempt to take that away. For about 14 years now, since I came into the Green Party of Suffolk, we have done nothing but say the buses need to be given round the clock to people, affordably and accessibly. Interesting thing is intersectionality, because this does intersect with things. Economics, because disabled people are economically discriminated against, and that's one area. In terms of LGBTQIA plus people, there are a lot of LGBTQIA plus disabled people, myself included. Women's issues, I live as a woman, and most of the disabled people I talk to are women. There are certainly enough disabled people of color. Thank you, Chanel, for being on this panel.
No problem.
And the other thing is the interesting intersections with other communities that you don't expect necessarily, or I think people should expect. I think people should expect any community should be willing to be good on these issues. But it's interesting, communities that I go to where I get better accessibility than some of the mainstream disability groups, some of the mainstream providers, government agencies. No, the places I go for disability access are my local Green chapter, the Green Party United States, though I will be very glad to see the Disability Caucus do everything we can to make that even better. I encounter good disability help, advocacy, accommodation in most of the LGBTQIA plus groups I'm around. Most of the kinky people groups have been very good on this. I happen to be a pagan, and most of the pagan groups that I encounter are either up on this or trying to be up on this. And okay, I'm wearing my Millennium Falcon shirt. I grabbed it because it's the first clean thing on hand, but you know what? Science fiction communities, every single one, including the one I met Dawnmarie through in 2005, have been wonderful on this. I am a hardcore Star Wars nerd, and I mention it because there are groups like the 501st Legion. Yeah, those dudes that walk around in the bulky, dorky, plastic stormtrooper guy armor. If I go to a science fiction convention, I know to go to those dudes because they are actually one of the bigger groups that do charity work on behalf of disability rights. And if I'm having trouble with access at a convention, I just find a stormtrooper and I'm like, hail the Empire, help me with this disability thing, please. And they fall over themselves to help me. I know it's a nerd tangent, but it applies because this is the idea that we as disabled people, there's a lot that we can do. We should also work with anybody who's going to be good and willing to work on this, so long as we get to say in our rights and our need to have our rights advocated for. Does that make sense, Chanel? I hope, because sometimes my words come out a bit odd the way my brain works.
It makes sense, Cynthia. I was just gonna say simple things that we can do now as a Green Party to make things more accessible. Cynthia mentioned alternative text. It's critical and it's simple and it's easy. But another thing we could do that would critically change how people interact with our platform is make sure that it's written in common language, like simplified language. We need to be writing and legislating in a way that is clear and understandable, even for someone with intellectual disabilities.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be a situation where people can't get to what we have to tell them because it's written in a way that only rocket scientists can understand. I know that a lot of Greens are scientists and they're very science-based, but if you can't explain your science in a way that a 9-year-old would understand it, you've done something wrong. I know that that would be a lot of work, but that's one of the reasons why we really need to do the last bit of work to get the Disability Caucus accredited so that we can look over the platforms, the bylaws, what have you, so that it's accessible in every way.
My local has done that. We have a board member with a cognitive disability who is a public activist for people with cognitive disabilities who speaks about her own experience. And we asked her, please look over this thing. Does it make any darn sense? And if it doesn't, tell us why. And I think every part of the Green Party should be doing this.
Yeah, that's why in the bylaws of the Disability Caucus, there's a specific committee that exists to look over things like this. I forget exactly the name of it because I don't have the bylaws in front of me because I'm on my phone and I'm in the living room right now. But the requirements for the Disability Caucus being accredited, the only thing we have left to do is verify that we have 100 members. We have to finish verifying our membership, and when we do that, we can turn in the application, and it'll probably be one of the fastest accreditations to ever happen in the history of the Green Party if we could just finish verifying our membership.
Yay. I so wanted to see this be officially accredited and all that, because I see a lot of good in the party, but I do think that we should still have something that says flat out, we are the place for disabled Greens. We are the voice for disabled Greens. Because with advocacy, there is the concern of making sure that the people who are directly affected by whatever it is are the ones who are setting the tone, who are saying the stuff. Every community that I've been in, there's always been the question, usually answered well in the end at least, of are the people who are directly the people at stake with this thing, are they getting to say their piece? And if not, fix that.
There it is. There it is. I found it. Okay, hold on. There it is. I found it. I'm sorry. I'm just gonna put the join link in the chat.
I'm nothing to apologize for. You're one of my go-to people. I call you what, like every 2 or 3 days, being Chanel. I don't know where this thing is, and my screenwriter pointed me toward here, but I think I went the wrong way. Please tell me what the heck's in the bylaws of any part of the party. And usually have an answer for me in 30 seconds. You're like MacGyver like that.
Okay, I put the form to join the Disability Caucus in the chat so that anyone who's not already joined can go ahead and do that. It seems like it's a lot of work to make things accessible, but because it's part of the backbone of this party, I don't think it would be that hard. I think a lot of people would want to do the little bit of work necessary to make everything about their party accessible. I would just join again. Someone can look at the list and double check. If we have some duplicates, it's not that big a deal. But yeah, as I was saying, this isn't as hard as it seems in terms of getting our platform and our party to walk its talk as it relates to disability, as it relates to being accessible and disabled friendly, because everything about how we exist as a party, except for the, excessive pushing of electric vehicles and trying to low-key outlaw cars sometimes. Some Green parties be out here really trying to outlaw cars. And that's a problem because for some disabled people, they need cars to get around because they have accessible vehicles. Now, when they get to the point of making fully accessible public transit, which I think is something the Green Party will advocate for, public transit that has rooms for wheelchairs and other devices, then people won't need cars as much.
That's the whole point. If everybody's saying we need to be earth eco-friendly and cars are a problem, yes, we need accessible public transit. Green Party of Suffolk picked up transit issues, not just because of me, but other people, because in Suffolk County in particular, we have a transit system and a paratransit disability system that said we cut off at around like 8:30 at night. And there's been so much work over the last decade and a half that I've been either involved or flirting with the party before then, of just trying to get the politicians to agree to the funding, to get the politicians to agree to take us seriously. Public transportation is one of the main areas that is vital on this. And at least every part of the Green Party I've encountered has been very good on this. I think we need to be at least as out in front on this issue as we've been, maybe a bit more, a lot more if we can be. And any allies that we can get who are willing to work on such issues. I mean, first of all, I want every Green to be kicking ass on this stuff. But I will also say, I will work with non-Greens as long as they understand I am a Green. I won't back any other party. I won't endorse any other candidate. I won't vote for any other candidate. But I will work with non-Greens who say the buses need to be given. The access needs to be given. The websites need to be made accessible. I mean, even things like if you are the person running a website, why the hell do we need these stupid CAPTCHA twisty word things? Fully sighted relatives of mine can't fill the darn things out for me. And if people say, oh, it keeps out spammers and hackers, check my inbox someday and find all the junk. I mean, that's some Alan Turing, who I who they're still arguing whether he had some neurodiversity stuff going on or not. His technology to see whether we'd have a real life C3PO has been twisted around a lot of time to keep disabled people off the internet, whether that was meant to by people or not. So yeah, making websites accessible is a big thing. I mean, particularly ever since 2020, everybody's moving more to doing things like we're on Zoom. A lot of our things are done over social media. All that needs to be made accessible. And that's an area the Green Party can certainly work on.
So we're 3 minutes to 6. Should we open this up for conversation and discussion now for the question and answer section first?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Unless
absolutely.
Chanel got anything else unless I stomped on anything Chanel was about to say. Yes, please.
Okay,
No,
I know.
please.
I know that Christopher has something that he wanted to comment on. So Christopher, I'm going to open your mic up.
Thank you very much. I wanted to point out one thing, which that while it's not known, I think by most folks, there was some expansion of the ADA in terms of language at some point. So that is relevant to folks. So there has been some expansion. However, we have this incredibly reactionary court that's bringing us back to the Lochner period. We need to be really aware of this because this can retract what little benefits we have. Also, another thing that I think is relevant to mention is the fact that most folks don't even know the basic fundamentals of how to advocate for their own selves. So, for example, the power of just being able to say, I require under law my recommendations, and here's what they are. Like, for example, I know I have friends who are disabled and are struggling to deal with different administrative agencies where they only allow them to communicate via email or something else, and they need to be able to actually talk to a person, or vice versa or something. And for them, they need to know, and they need to have the ability to communicate that to those agencies and say, no, under the law, I have the right to these reasonable accommodations. You have to go out of your way, no matter how much of a pain in the ass it is for Section 8 to go and do their job. For my friend in Phoenix, no, you have to talk with her because she has PTSD and other issues, and she needs assistance. So you need to get up and call and provide that accommodation. And the other thing I had mentioned in chat was that it was mentioned before transportation. One that I think is really important. In Oregon, we had this as part of the OE. There was a reimbursement. We're able to for ride to care. You could get they had like some card and you could actually get money back. It originally was like something cents a mile and it was based on the rate. But then they reduced it dramatically. And with that, I think that it's really important for us, especially for mental health and how many people are afraid to access those things, to those resources, in order to incentivize not only accessing care, but also recognize real total cost. And many people who are poor and they'll have vehicles that are practically ready to fall apart and will have incredible transportation struggles, myself included. So I think this is a very important area to focus on too, is that aspect of access.
I wasn't aware of some of the amendments to the ADA that you're mentioning. I know what the basic ADA says on a lot of things. I hope that there's somewhere I could just look that up later rather than just Googling my butt up for it.
Yeah, there's a court, to my understanding, there were at least one Supreme Court case where, and it may have been the Circuit Court of Appeals, I'm not totally sure offhand, but they expanded definition or the interpretation of the ADA. I found this out during another conference, talking to a specialist who worked at OHSU here in Portland, Oregon, about how the ADA had been expanded, not legislatively so much, but in terms of how the court interprets it. So that expansion in meaning and in basically broader interpretation. So that broader interpretation has enabled more administrative for people. However, that does not necessarily mean that it solves all of our problems, because it certainly doesn't. But that's at least something relevant to consider, especially with the problem right now with the court, and you know, what God only knows what's going to happen. You know, so that's something I think we need to be aware of and fighting against in case that situation comes to pass.
No, for sure. I'm
Yeah,
just going to
thanks.
take a second to look up something because I'm trying to get the exact name of this piece of legislation. The Disability Integration Act of 2020 is another thing I wanted to like bring up a little bit, because as people mentioned in the last panel, people who are elderly are getting siloed out of communities, and so are people that are disabled. That piece of legislation would allow for essentially a change in how things are built so that disabled people can be in the communities and not have to be like put into specific disabled housing that is far away from things and not integrated into their into the communities. Cause I mean, I know there used to be like ugly laws that prevented us from going outside and being seen by people because it was obscene to be disabled in like the, was it 40s? I'm not exactly sure when those laws were a thing, but I'm glad
Sounds
they
like
got
30s,
outlawed
40s,
because
thereabouts.
Period.
I'm gonna really quickly look up something. We can continue the conversation. I'm still here, but I'll be right
And
back.
thanks
And
for making it even clearer about how advocacy for yourself works. I hope that I've done a good job on that, but you pretty much said it in like 2 sentences, what took me a paragraph.
And one thing that I would mention is based off the previous statement about you know, expanding access. There, I mean, shown that the cost of in-home, so people can remain in their home, is much less than warehousing. I mean, like the payments for Medicaid, for example, if somebody gets thrown into an institution of some form, you need, you know, $6,000, $8,000, $10,000, and you know, people will get shoved in rooms and they will spiral. And this is an issue that you know, was supposed to be funded. It was supposed to be funded so that folks could stay at home and do these sorts of things, but it never was. You know, we got rid of the institutions, the institutionalization, but we never actually funded the means federally so that people could actually live in those communities. So instead, we have folks wandering around without the meaningful access that they need.
Yeah. And it does seem that with everything in politics, they bring it back to money, and it needs to be told to the politicians, you'll be saving money by treating people like people and not messing with their rights.
For the cost of like 2% of the military budget, we could have everything we need and then some.
Yeah, it's a classic, what's it, guns or butter, as they called it back in the 80s. As in, which would the federal government actually be putting money into?
It's also very weird. I've learned recently as I've been doing more research and listening to people that know more on this than I do. simple things that will make life easier for disabled people in a time of like pandemic. They're like, if people would just put into infrastructure like better filtration devices, things like COVID and certain parts of monkeypox wouldn't be able to be as transmissible. COVID is a mass disabling event right now because people are getting COVID and then they're getting sick and they're not able to recover fully. They're becoming disabled from their experiences with COVID-19. And I mean, just simple things like having a better filtration system for air would prevent a lot of airborne diseases that make people more susceptible to disability. Disability is one of those things that has no age or race or creed.
Yeah.
Anyone can be disabled at any time. I was born disabled, but other people I know weren't. My uncle, for instance, acquired epilepsy when he was hit in the head with a rock. Like neighborhood children got upset with him or something and they threw a rock at his head, and ever since then he's been epileptic. And when I think about all the different ways that people could suddenly have everything that they thought they needed, and then one thing changes and now your whole life needs to be rearranged. I mean, even when you're already disabled, I sprained my hip some type of way, and it literally took me out of commission for like a year because I had to figure out how to move different, figure out how to deal with that pain. And I mean, I'm still not back to where I was in 2020 or 2019, but I figured out what's wrong at least. I'm lucky enough to have pretty decent doctors in my current area where they wouldn't stop looking until they knew what was wrong. I'm glad it wasn't a break or anything, but it was a sprain that literally made it so I couldn't move around, could barely get to the next room because I was in so much pain or just because my leg wouldn't let me move. And it kind of sucks when even when you have crutches, you can't move around the way that you want to because the pain is too much. People have a tendency to pity those with disabilities because they don't understand that having a disability doesn't make you less than anyone else.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to be inspiration porn for some abled person, but at the same time, I want them to respect me and know that my requests for access needs are not special. They're rights, damn it.
Yeah, it's about equality. I don't want people to pity me. I want people to treat me with equality. I want respect. I want people to either listen when I say I need help doing a thing, or I at least want people to ask me instead of telling me whether I can do a thing or not. I mean, fun contrast is on a bad note, some of the official like state and government agencies have tried to tell me, oh, because you have this disability, we don't think you can or should do such and such thing. I go to one of my shaman's houses and his wife actually offers me a way to chop a melon with a sword. And she tells me, I think you could do better at it next time. Here's a trophy for being the blind swordswoman of the day. It's about respect. It's about treating people as equals. It's about demanding if it's okay, as disabled people, we do need sometimes to demand to be treated with equality. As people who aren't disabled, people who don't have a disability need to demand that the disabled people that they know, and even the ones that y'all don't know, also be treated with respect and equality. I think that's what am I right, Chanel, that this is basically what everything comes down to?
Pretty much. And the thing is, it shouldn't take a bunch of people becoming disabled for them to suddenly realize that disabled people matter and need to have our rights, affirmed. Like, I mean, it sucks that it takes people getting really, really sick and then seeing what it's like to not have your needs met for them to learn what it was like when things were taken away from, some of us by way of not having accessible world.
Yeah. think everyone needs to keep stuff like that in mind, that things should be accessible to everybody. And yeah, the simple act of asking somebody, I mean, I've had people tell me, "Oh, I'm cutting up your meat for you." I'm like, you know what? I've handled a freaking sword. I think I know how to handle your average common person steak knife. So yeah, it's also asking people rather than telling them. That's a huge, huge thing.
Oh, another interesting thing about the ADA, and I think it goes to what Christopher was speaking earlier, the ADA doesn't require you to have like doctor's documentation of your disability. Just your word on it is good enough now.
Oh.
That was one of the major changes that happened, which is a godsend for all the autistic people I know.
Yep.
Yeah, because that's not always diagnosed. I have an aunt who does IEP help for kids on the autism spectrum, and she'll be one of the first people to tell you, not all doctors even understand it.
Really important for us and for the communities to know the power of the words reasonable accommodation, that it is my right, reasonable accommodation or to accommodation. That can cause entire systems to have to shift, and you can cause bureaucracy, security. So many agencies under law are forced to actually accommodate you, but you have to be willing, or have someone who is willing to stand up with you and say, no, this is the law, you need to apply it.
Yeah.
And that's something I think that we'd be able to teach if we just got enough disabled people in a room to sit down and come up with like a panel on that, just on advocacy alone. It could be powerful and it could be strong, because we have a lot of people with disabilities in this party. Like, I was surprised by the amount of people with disabilities that are already in this party, some that are policy experts and some that are just life experts who could really just break down how to advocate for yourself. It's something we could easily have a panel on. It's something that we probably should have a panel on soon. I don't know
Oh,
how to put that
yes.
together, but we definitely could.
No, hell yeah, we need that panel. And I'll say that 50% of the executive board of the party that is my current local would be on that with the rest of us.
I think also there are a lot of Greens, or sorry, people who aren't currently registered as being Greens, who very likely would be willing to join the parties simply because of that advocacy.
Yeah. We need to push this as an issue that publicly, as I said, through media, social media, whatever, to let people know we're the Green Party and we care a lot about disability rights, equality, access. And I admit it, we should be braggy and say we're better than the other two mainstream parties. Let people know we're not going to dump y'all or forget about it when it comes time to be beholden to the corporates like the blue and red parties are.
One of the things that I'm gonna be doing soon is I'm gonna take a point to look at most of the legislation that is targeted toward, hold on, I missed these questions, but look at most of the legislation targeted toward disability so that we can actually get that to the National Committee to actually endorse the legislation. So we could put out more social media around these things. We could bring it up. We could let people know that when you're talking about hashtag Crip the Vote, you're talking about Greens, because this is stuff that's part of our integrated into the Green New Deal, integrated into our platform anyway. I think that we as a party need to start reaching in and showing, giving that example of what green legislation would look like. I mean, yes, we're not in federal office yet, but we can take stands on federal legislation. We can give talking points to our candidates so if they know how to speak on this stuff, we can essentially stand on our platform's record of disability rights by also showing these pieces of legislation that we support. And maybe that will help people understand that the Green Party is where disabled Americans need to call their political home.
Mm-hmm. Did you say we had a couple other questions?
Okay, Dee brought up barriers to accessing agencies that serve people with disabilities. Yeah, like Christopher said, a lot of people don't know they exist. That's one. Another one that was mentioned earlier is the excessive amounts of paperwork that you sometimes have to do to get certain disability services started for you. I'm trying to think of an example, but like, I'm trying to think of an example, but I'm drawing a blank right now.
I could give an example with respect to Social Security that immediately pops in my mind. Two problems. One is that with Social Security, due to the federal paper reduction act, a lot of times you can't even get all the paperwork. It's digital. They've created countless numbers of forms that you have to know about in advance to fill out. You basically have to be an attorney. If you don't, if your case is too complicated, chances are you won't be able to get represented because there's a limit that lawyers are allowed to receive in terms of payment, and so that creates a huge problem. And also, another major issue is the fact there are a lot of scam places out there that claim to that will, like for example, what happened to me, where they will make you think that they are representing, like they're a lawyer or something, and in fact they're not, and caused me. I ended up with everything all combined. I've currently, with my SSI, have reduced payments because I have apparently $21,000 in overpayments, and nobody will help me on that. No lawyer. They've all told me that they can't help you. So.
Chanel also mentioned earlier the need for language to be simple to understand. I would say that some agencies need to know more about putting things accessible to blind and visually impaired people, other things on people with hearing disabilities, things like that. Making buildings accessible to people with mobility disabilities is still sometimes, oddly enough, in some agencies, even in some state offices or local offices for people with disabilities. All this stuff is something that needs to be addressed when it comes up, if it comes up.
The heaviness of doors is just so much. Like, certain buildings are like grandfathered into not being accessible, and that's annoying. Like, a ridiculous amount of churches don't have to be accessible because they were built before a certain date and because they're a church. And it's one of my friends that ran for office in 2018 has a disability. She's a Democrat or whatever. Amanda Seabury. I think that's how you pronounce her name. Anyway, she got people together, other people that were running for office, and she had them rent wheelchairs and try to go just a mile to see what it was like to use a wheelchair in the Oregon area. And they were just straight struggling because of the fact that the streets are not level and it's hard to use a wheelchair in these conditions, and they weren't familiar with it. People shouldn't have to do thought experiments like that to learn, but
Yeah.
it would be useful to do just to see where things are lacking in terms of accessibility in your city. Like for me, one of the most frustrating things, it actually caused me to straight cry on the bus stop one day, is the distance between the bus stop button and the curb cut for where you can step off the curb safely to get to the sidewalk. I mean, not the sidewalk, the crosswalk. because I had my laundry and I was trying to be an independent Black woman and go do my laundry myself without calling an Uber, Lyft access, trying to do my laundry myself because I didn't have anything else to do that day. And I physically could not press the button and still get to the curb because it was like 3 feet apart. And I'm thinking, who designed this city? Like, why is it that my stuff will roll into the street if I stay close to the curb, but I can't start the walking for the crosswalk because of the fact that I can't press the button and hold my laundry. I had to give up on that day and I just cried and got frustrated because all I wanted to do was go less than a mile away to do some laundry, and I couldn't because no one had thought about the fact that disabled people can't, move their wheelchairs or move their bodies between this curb cut, which is too far away from this what do you call the crosswalk button, you guys? I can't think of what it's
I think it's
called,
just the
and it's
crosswalk
frustrating
button.
me. Oh, okay.
But yeah, some of the older buildings are not terribly compliant with things like the ADA or anything. When I had to get some of my SSI stuff processed, at one point I had to get a piece of paperwork looked over by a judge, and I had to have family members help me, even with my white cane, through the steps to that building. And I'm a construction worker's daughter. My dad's looking at this set of steps. And he's like, nope, nope. Back in my day, we'd have to tear this thing out and build it fresh.
That is really
So these are all
cool.
things that need to be addressed when they're there and can be addressed.
There's a lot of things, but most of what people need is already part of the green platform. They just need to be publicized better. Because I mean, the
Yeah.
Disability Integration Act, for instance, the DIA, is essentially part of the Green New Deal about how you build in a way where the communities are integrated so that you have multiple income levels of housing and accessible housing and accessible communities that are walkable. That makes sense. And if you have things set up where people who need community-based care can have that, that's already in the Green New Deal, and it's part of the Disability Integration Act. And we could be pushing for this piece of legislation to be passed, and it could show, like I said before, what Greens are about legislatively, because a lot of people have no idea how we legislate because we're not there yet. But if we show them through pushing legislation where we can, through critiquing legislation where we can show them exactly what it would look like to have Greens in federal office, Greens in state office, Greens in local office, and what that means for the community and how to change the conversation.
My local is doing all the stuff you said, and I think every Green chapter should be doing it. We got any
On
other
transportation, I
questions?
want to shout out Pennsylvania because they also do amazing work on transportation.
Wonderful. Yeah, I was just wondering, are we skipping over any other questions? Because I want to get as many as we can in whatever time we got left.
We're at about 5 minutes. Wait, what time is it in? 3:50?
6:40 is the 10-minute call, but you have till 6:50 in this room.
Oh, okay.
Alrighty. Yeah, I thought that's what my screener said to me this morning. I'm just used to doing events where we cover all the material and realize, oh crud, we left 8 seconds for a Q&A. I never want to do that if I can help it.
Hey, is it okay if I speak real quick? I don't want to interrupt anyone.
Go
No,
ahead.
please.
Oh, hey guys, I just want to let you know my name's Ryan, and I'm sorry I'm a little late, but I don't know if this issue's been touched up on, but this is an issue I do want to bellyache about. Disability in education. And it's not just the public schools that are a problem, and I've been in public schools, K to 12. it's also the private schools.
Private schools can discriminate against disabled children. Go ahead.
Funny you should say that. Okay, so people say public schools are bad for people with disabilities. Private schools can be even worse because one, they can discriminate. Two, they allow them in and just give them little to no resources. And there's not much repercussions for them. Oh, and the public schools, ones that are supposed to be more accommodating to disabled children, are not. They just throw them in a class a lot of the times and just forget about them, so they don't get in trouble for the student, and so the students are not considered delinquent.
Yeah, because it depends on what the school in question, and it should not be that. It should be it should be the one thing that should be standard is that people get an equal access to education, people get an equal access to respect in that education. In my case, I was in special ed until middle of third grade for speech issues, and I can say that my mom and I had to advocate for me through half my childhood of, okay, you don't get to treat my kid like this. And I'm like, you don't get to treat me like this, because essentially they gave up on being able to measure my reading level, yet I was being told, oh, you don't understand a basic story. Meanwhile, I was reading the great masters of Gothic literature at 4 and 5 in these classes when my eyes were better. And in the end, my mom just told the school system, screw this. My kid's going to regular school because you people aren't serving them. And too often that has been what parents and families have had to do. It should be equal access. It should be equal respect, where you have equal access to an education, that education is done accessibly in a way that actually helps. And accommodations should be reasonable and make sense, as was it Chris said, reasonable accommodation.
Education is one of those weird things because if parents don't know what's going on, their child could just be kind of left there, as was stated earlier. I was in special ed the entirety of my K through 12 because I have a physical disability. And I remember once I changed schools and went to Corona, they had put me in classes with children who had intellectual disability because they assumed that because I had CP that I automatically had an intellectual disability. I looked at the projects for Greece and I was like, that's the movie Hercules. That's wrong. That's wrong. I've actually read this story and that's not how this is supposed to go. And they immediately moved me to more grade appropriate classes. But charter schools and private schools have a tendency to sneakily discriminate against disabled students and not have the resources available for students. And it's frustrating because you don't know what to do.
There's also having to make sure that other bigotries aren't being done in places like special ed schools. I joke that I'm hyper sinister because I am very left-handed. The hand holding this iPhone is the hand that I hold 99% of everything with, except by the time my mom yanked me out of the last place that wasn't respecting me, she noticed, why are you suddenly eating with your other hand? And I was too messed up by that kind of experience to be able to tell her the schools that, but she figured out, ooh, I did not envy any of those people when she found out, but stuff like this, I mean, just because somebody is put in a special school should not be treated in any way that you wouldn't treat someone who's non-disabled.
Right. And another thing that we got to figure out how to get them to stop doing is putting kids in isolation rooms because they're having autistic meltdowns or other situations. Like, because the thing that bothers me about special ed schools in some places is they're able to like isolate a child in a dark room by themselves or pin a child down with like straps and things. They can do that because of the fact that they're like a private disabled school. And I don't know why exactly, but we need to be, we do advocate against things like that, but we need to do it louder.
Yeah, isn't that on our platform?
I think so. Not in those exact words, but I think
But the
so.
general idea that this stuff is wrong, y'all don't do it, I think is somewhere on our platform. I gotta sit my butt down with my iPad and the platform again, but I do think if it's not on the youth rights, it's in some other part of our rights, I think.
There's so much integration between our platform and disability rights. If we're advocating properly for education, no child would literally get left behind. I mean, I just think about how much better life would be if we could have a Green New Deal across this country advocated in the right way.
Yeah,
That's the thing that keeps me going. It be hard being a Green a lot of days. But when I think about what it is we're fighting for and why we do this, I have to keep going.
yeah. I'm too stubborn to give up on any of this stuff. I'm too much a stereotypical New York Italian construction worker's daughter to not keep fighting on all this.
We do need to set up legal aid for parents in situations like this
We're laughing
because
at you.
it's very confusing. And I mean, special ed is supposed to be a service. And as a lot of disability rights advocates that I follow on Twitter have said, our rights are not like, they're not special needs, they're rights, they're something that we're supposed to have.
Yeah,
It's not a situation where we should have to beg and plead on our knees for these things, when if you'd given us accessibility from jump, we wouldn't have any barriers. If you'd given us
yeah,
accessibility from Jump Street, we wouldn't have the barriers that we have now. We wouldn't have any excessive needs. We wouldn't have special needs if you just built an accessible society. One thing I know that the Green Party is trying to do is build a fully accessible society where people are not in a situation where they can't thrive because of language or ability or anything. It's part of the reason that I'm
yeah,
here, even though it's hard, even though I get talked down to a lot, even though people ask me a lot why I'm wasting my time. There's a lot of things that we as Greens can do better, but it's like we gotta try.
yeah.
And then,
So
I'm
exactly.
sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with Chanel. Please go.
Okay. I totally agree with you on that. And I like I said, I agree that these isolation rooms are just solitary confinement in schools.
Yeah,
If you guys don't know what solitary confinement in prison is, you can do a quick Google search. You will find out it is not pleasant.
yeah,
But anyways, another issue I want to talk about is mental hospitals, like psychiatric residents. I have known people with disabilities, like I'm talking like disabled, who were put in mental hospital because they had a meltdown. And essentially what happened was they were told that they can stay a week and nothing bad will happen to them. Otherwise, they can go to court, get a lawyer, which very often, by the way, is like the court system used for, what's the term? Civil confinement. I think that's what it's called or something. The courts very often side with the hospital. Like literally, like you don't get the same amount of rights as you would like like if you weren't in a mental institution, like fighting a case.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, if you were outside of a mental institution fighting a case. And another thing, what was it? Oh no, I'm sorry, I'm going way ahead of myself. It was either my friend can stay a week and let the insurance take care of it, or go to court, battle it out, don't sign the paper, and essentially run the risk of involuntary commitment. So that means they can stay there even longer. And one of two things would happen. One, they would basically just stay there at a hospital, have the insurance take the insurance's money, and then not give them really help, and they still strip their rights away. Two, they go to court, lose, they stay there for even longer, so they're going to get more. Now the hospital's going to get more money, or the person's going to get, and then they get thrown out and no treatment. Or what happens is they keep, the state takes over, because sometimes
Conservatorship?
check, and then they just basically they're in prison, essentially.
Yeah, there's a lot of that legislation going around that would force people into court to justify how they're living and force people into conservatorships. There's something in California called the CARES Act. I don't know if there's enough time for us to fight this piece of legislation, but the way it's designed to force unhoused people either into prison or mental hospital, and it's designed to force people with mental illness either into mental hospital or conservatorship based on how this piece of legislation is written. The way that people with mental illness are treated in this country, it sucks, because most mental illnesses would probably be less severe if people's material needs were met. I'm not going to say that mental illness will completely disappear if everyone's material needs were met, because some disabilities that are mental illnesses are not, connected to the loss of needs, but most of them would be far less debilitating if the rest of society, you didn't have to basically decide whether you were gonna pay for your medication or eat some food, because you could only have one or the other.
At the very least, people's lives would be better. They would be more respected, less stigmatized, and would have more resources.
Oh, and here's another thing on that topic. I'm glad you mentioned that. They're getting thrown in prison or in the mental institution. A lot of the times, they can't even go to a mental institution because they're so poorly funded nowadays. And the companies, okay, so and the ones that are not owned by the state are just penny pinchers. So the option is either homelessness or jail/prison. And to be honest with you, that's actually the best case scenario. That's the first option, which is go homeless. Or jail. Or jail/prison. I don't know. That's really subjective. But yeah, ever since, what was it, the 70s or the 80s, when we found out that
Reagan. Didn't Reagan close down a lot of the mental institutions in the 80s, and instead of providing other options, it was just see ya?
Yep.
That's how it was. And also, I think, what was it? A lot of society started to kind of agree with Reagan, because you remember that incident what happened with that, we found out what happened with Penn State School and the hospital. Well, that's not the only reason. That's not the only hospital that was doing it. Far from it, but that's one of the most notable ones. I understand that society has said, hey, that's absolutely just atrocious what went on at Pennhurst and at these other institutions. But cutting funding for mental health facilities is not the answer. We need better oversight. And they're really hasn't been much change in that for the most part.
For sure. We need funding for mental health services, just like we need fundings for all other types of disabilities.
Yeah.
Oversight is really important because, well, oversight is what's necessary to prevent people from being abused in a lot of situations.
We also need a lot more just people, understanding that all the stereotypes about mental health issues are a lot of harmful stereotypes, ending the stigmatization. It's why I speak out on some of the things I've been through, that I speak out about having been through post-traumatic stress and suicidality and things like that in my life, because dealing with things like that and having dealt with depression issues, I've had people that have been in the workshops I've given on that and say, wow, I'm able to talk about this more because you were on this panel of such and such. I've done crisis and suicide prevention work. And a lot of it comes down to people need to realize that this is not something that makes you less of a person. This is not something that you should be ashamed of. This is something that happens, especially because of the messed up world we live in.
Yeah, I mean, I came across a post the other day where someone was talking about how we needed to end the stigma around taking antipsychotics. And I mean, that's the type of medication that people need, but there's a huge stigma around it because people think if you take antipsychotics that you're a dangerous individual. I think we had a candidate once for Senate or whatever essentially say that she wanted to bar people with certain disabilities from being able to hold office or something. And she specifically mentioned bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. Um, I was, of course, taken aback by that. And this was before my bipolar disorder diagnosis. I take antipsychotics now, and they've made my life easier to live. But if I had let the stigma around the thought of that medication get to me, I probably would have been on a different medication and not been able to have the energy to do half the stuff I do now because I would have been asleep.
Mm-hmm. And anytime a politician says anything against anybody's disabilities, that should just be a hard note on them either getting to office in the first damn place or staying in office. There was a county legislator in my county. When Kate Browning was a legislator in my county, she actually wanted to criminally fingerprint people that use those Lifeline and insurance phones. And luckily, she did not get a next term. She was fool enough to run for US Congress, and she lost because people brought up, look at your record on disability. And that pretty much scotched her attempt to run for Congress. And I'm very grateful that people throughout my state voted to say, no, people with disabilities are people. You don't get to say that stuff, which is another part of advocacy. Saying when good people do good stuff, say, yeah, I'm glad for that. More people should do this. When bad people do bad stuff, advocacy is saying that ain't cool. Is that a simplification of it, Chanel, or does it make sense?
No, it makes sense. We at the 5-minute mark now.
Anyone else that didn't get a question in? I know I talk a lot, but there's a lot to cover.
Man, it is a lot to cover, and I want to do another one of these soon where we could just get into the legislation for a bit.
I think that's a great idea.
Maybe
Was
the
there any?
diversity committee could do it. We could do a search or something and see if we could put it on a panel like this where we kind of get into the different pieces of legislation and what that would mean. Because I'd be totally down, especially since I happen to follow this sort of thing anyway.
I'd love to help on that once we start working on it.
Did we
Does
miss
anyone else
anything,
have a
Dawn?
comment to make or question?
Ooh, we can't even cover that right now. I am concerned about firearms restrictions for people with mental illness too, because it doesn't necessarily make sense. Man, that would require another panel entirely.
Yeah, that's a much longer conversation. We got the next like 4 minutes on.
Yeah, I'd love to participate in that one.
We definitely need to like exchange emails or something, because I definitely want to have more things like this where we could get into the nitty gritty of it. Because I mean, I'm a little off right now because one of my dogs just passed away, and I'm not where I would normally be for a day like this. But I knew I had to be here, so I'm trying to do my best. So I know I missed something, and I apologize.
You've been freaking amazing. Is my email up on like one of the chat things or something? If I wanted my phone to tell me what's in the chat, it would be talking over y'all in a robot voice. Because that'd be fun if people have my email. I'd rather have real emails from real people than robots telling me.
I believe the
what to
chat
vote.
is being recorded as well as the program, and that it'll be available from the Green Party site, but I'm not real sure on the chat.
Well,
But
if
the
somebody can
program
throw my
is
email up.
recorded. Yeah. You got about 2 minutes, so I'll be the.
Okay, I'll try to put my
I guess one
contact
last
information
pass of
here, too.
anyone, Bueller.
Please, no, Ben died. He's far too right.
Sorry, I grew up in the 80s.
Hey, it's okay. It's okay. I know. I just unfortunately know where his bullshit economic policies go. Gotta go more with like Michael Hudson. It's much better.
You know what I hate happens? I hate when a mental institution that gets shut down is set for demolished, especially some of these older ones where it's like,
Because
okay,
people use that building for housing.
well, not even that. Okay, so well, not just that. So a few years ago, there was Cheddarbrook. It was in Cheddarbrook, New Jersey, I think it was. It was a mental institution that was known for treating the you guessed it, the disabled really horribly. Like there was such a prolific history of abuse. It's not even funny. I wish I could put it in chat, but the link to it, but I don't know the name of it. But yeah, they demolished it, and I'm like, no, they could make that into, like you said, partially a assisted living, like some sort of, or museum for people to learn from the past.
Okay,
Very
and that's
crucial, that.
350. I think that's the end of the panel.
Thanks for coming out, everyone.
That's officially the end of the panel. If you want me, and I'll hit in the recording.
Thank you very much. I'd appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you all for coming. It's been